what you really want to be looking at is how can you continuously monitor that ICP, understand whether or not their behaviors have changed and their needs have changed.
Could you break it down for us what segment, target, and position means in plain terms for anyone to understand?
Segment is segmenting your market, the targets you want to go after, and then positioning, which, in my opinion, in STP is more about messaging.
How does that affect or change the way that a target list is built for an ABM program or campaign?
Because there's no point chasing people you're not going to sell to, and then start ruling them out. So my 15 suddenly becomes 10. Then I look and I say, okay, maybe these ones actually have the same need.
From your point of view, your experience, when you're doing that, how do you actually measure and do the attribution here?
What can happen is you try and pinpoint the exact channel, the exact campaign which did the thing. And yet, logically, we all know it's multiple actions, it's multiple campaigns, it's going to be some offline, online stuff.
If you were auditing an ABM program today, what's the first sign you'd look for that tells you that the target account list has gone stale and needs a change? Welcome back to ASTRAD Talks. Today, we're diving deep into the engine room of B2B growth and enterprise account strategy. Too many B2B companies treat their ideal customer profile like some sort of a holy relic, right? They lock it in a workshop once a year, dust it off, slide deck, and never touch it again while running the same static target list into the ground. Our guest today is here to tear that approach down. Sam O'Brien is the founder of ASTRAD and a veteran marketing leader who has scaled GTM operations across the board, serving as VP of marketing at Graya, Dealfront, and Real VNC, and driving growth at Ring Central during their massive run for $300 million to over $1 billion in revenue. He's an expert at blending hard data with sharp strategy to solve complex scale-up growth problems. Today, we are unpacking why traditional ICPs are failing ABM programs, how to shift your mindset to dynamic STP, segmentation, targeting, and positioning, and how to operationalize behavioral data so your target list actually evolves with the market. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Daniel. Brilliant introduction. I think you've oversold me, but I'll take it. I'll take it.
Excellent. And again, thank you very much for being here, Sam.
I'm looking forward to it.
Let's get started. One of the main questions that I have, I think it's the perfect kickoff here, is for anyone who hasn't come across it, what I mentioned before, STPs. Could you break it down for us what segment, target, and position means in plain terms for anyone to understand?
Yeah, so, I mean, as simple as we can get. Segment is obviously segmenting your market. Target is picking the targets you want to go after, and then positioning, which in my opinion, in STP is more about messaging. It's like, how are you going to message to that particular segment that you're targeting? So I would look at your market as a whole, all the different verticals, geos, use cases you've got within that market. That's your whole view. And what you want to do is you want to go in there and start segmenting it up, literally like, an orange segment, slicing it up and picking individual buying groups that you want to go and target. So what I think often happens is we create a ICP, which is this huge market we want to go after, but we don't look at what the individual buyers are doing with the product that we're selling or how their use case might be different, how we need to message to them differently. So really, segmentation is taking that market view and then finding the segments which connect together, grouping them together, and you can bring that into a target that you could target specifically versus trying to, target your entire ICP, which often is pretty big because people are scared of small ICPs.
That's an interesting one because I know that we chatted briefly before the start of the recording, and in a kind of thing that happens a lot is that people say, let's just go after all of these accounts and target everyone within the accounts, which in a way it can feel we don't want to narrow it down too much, But usually, in my experience, people do target too broadly within those accounts, right? And that's without even mentioning if there's any logic within that picking of accounts and strategy that they put together.
Yeah, I've always believed you should go broad when trying to build the brand. So, if you're doing brand campaigns and you cast a much bigger net, I think it's good. It helps you, protect your growth for the future. Maybe you're creating content which might open up a new market for you in the future. So I think that brand building should be broad, and you don't have to focus on the targeting. But ultimately, when you're trying to get into buying cycles and actually getting someone to buy from you,
Exactly.
you want to be super targeted. And I feel like the fear often comes from, if you make the market too small, how are you going to hit your sales targets? And for me, when I go through the STP process, I will always look at my segments to the best of my ability, understand how many companies are in that segment and my ACV. So I start to get a kind of market understanding of what the potential is there. And then I'll take the 5%, take the standard 95.5. If 5% of that market is enough for my sales team to hit target, it's probably enough of a market. I think that's where people get lost. They don't want to do that. They want a really huge ICP, which is going to cover their next 5 years worth of targets. And that ultimately ends up in very untargeted marketing.
Yeah, indeed. And one of the things that we also mentioned is how people don't put too much logic or effort when building their list. So coming from the STP framework, how does that affect or change the way that a target list is built for an ABM program or campaign, right? So compared to just working off a single, static ICP.
Yeah, I agree. I think when people are often building their lists, I'm going through this at the moment where you kind of get the sales wish list, and it's companies that they want to sell for. And I've mentioned this on many podcasts, but one day the guy's going to call me up and say, stop calling me out for it. But I worked with a sales guy and all he wanted was to sell to Chelsea. Like, honestly, that was his dream. So, it was like Chelsea, anything around Chelsea sponsors, they were the companies he wanted to target. So it leads you down that path of like, we're not really targeting people that we can sell to. In STP, again, because you're looking at that entire market and you're making decisions to rule out people, and again, if I was to build my market now, I would take in the firmographics and, it depends on the tool, but maybe I'm taking in some demographic information. Maybe I'm taking in like technology they're using, anything like that to build these individual segments. Then once I've got, say maybe to start with, I might have, 10, 15 different segments that I could go after. And I'm going to look at them, start looking at the companies inside them and start seeing which ones of these are actually going to get value out of our product. Which ones do we truly believe we can sell to? Because there's no point chasing people you're not going to sell to. And then start ruling them out. So my 15 suddenly becomes 10. Then I look and I say, okay, maybe these ones actually have the same need, their buying behavior is the same. So let's not target them as a separate one. Let's merge them into one group. And you try and get down to like 6. And all of a sudden, you're left with a much smaller pot of companies you want to target. And again, then I think that's where you really get sales involved. If you're more of an enterprise or mid-market function anyway, have sales involved, start going through, spot checking the accounts. Hey, this segment over here, we've got an account like this, like this, like this. Can you see the use case that they'd need? Do you think it adds up? And just spot checking. And I've always found if you go through like 10, 20 companies and sales are, 90%, yes, that's good, I can see it, then your segmenting's good. If you go through 10, 20 companies and they're not sure, you've got to go back and, go back through that process and, make sure they're buying into it.
Okay. So coming from that, let's go into the segment part of SCP. Would you be able to walk us through how that works in practice? So how do you segment a market with that behavioral data rather than, just using the standard firmographics before you start building your actual account list?
Yeah, I think probably best to work from an example. If I think about like a password management technology, because it can be sold to anyone all the way from like a personal user all the way up to an enterprise. So what you would probably find is if you start looking at, I would use a CRM to start with. I'd look at who we've sold to, where we've had success, look at retention rates, everything like that to try and build an understanding of the buyer. Then I would really focus on those use cases. What are they using it for? What are they actually trying to get out of it? And again, in this case, you've got maybe like a power user, a home user who probably shares very similarities to a small business owner. They're using it in the same way.
Yeah.
So their profile technically would be very different, but their use case is very similar. Right. On the other end, you're going to have an enterprise who shares no similarities with the power user. They're buying it very differently. There's going to be a CIO involved, much bigger buying group. The way they use it's going to be different. The way they buy it's going to be different. So I would start looking in my CRM and understanding the different buyers and understanding the different use cases. Then I take that and I start going to tools, like Clay or Apollo's, ZoomInfo, whatever you've got, and start looking at the companies involved. How many companies can I find that match these descriptions? Where can I find similarities? And start trying to map out the geos or the verticals or the industries that these companies are in. And ultimately, what I want to end up with is this full view where I can say my entire market is, 200,000 accounts. But these segments here, I've got 2,000 in the enterprise segment, which, these are just in the US. They're just in this vertical. They're just, they've got these people in a company group, and that's one segment. But then I might have a huge mass market segment because, again, this is a tool we can sell to anyone, which is like any startup between 1 and 5 people in the UK, the Nordics, US, whatever. They're buying this way, and I think their approach is going to be very different. They're going to be quick, no sales cycle. As long as they've got X, Y, Z on the staff, I believe they're also a good fit. So you start to go through, and that's why I think the ICP thing kind of falls down, because people often want one ICP. And I'm not against ICPs at all, but I think the segmented approach allows you to look at the different use cases, different buying behaviors, but building that with the firmographics, technographics, and all the other information you can collect to get a clear vision of each segment.
Right. So, and this is a very interesting one, because I think that the example that you used is perfect. Like when you have a company that can sell to enterprise clients, but also like individuals as well. So it's perfect to see, once we build those segments, how do we decide who within those segments do we activate? Do we want to actually deliver to? And because the fact that you have like multiple tiers of segments, let's say, that of importance, the type of, again, of client that you're going to get, the size of the market, the priorities, that doesn't mean that you don't want to deliver to the other ones, but maybe with a lighter touch, right? So once you've built all of that, how does the mechanism work, in your opinion, in order to decide what is activated and in which way?
Yeah, once we've segmented and we've picked the segments we're going to go after, so the picking would be based on, I wouldn't be led by the sales team, but it would be based on where we have sales team, where we have the coverage, where we need to drive business for them. And I say I wouldn't be led by the team because in this case, I have been through this process before where you realize there's a segment which in theory we should have because we've got a lot of sales reps there, but actually it's a very overly competitive. We're not going to win there. So you have to make some hard decisions when you go through this. But yeah, so I would focus on the segments. I've decided where I'm going to go. Now what I would start looking at is where can I get coverage to those accounts. So again, let's say I've created a segment with 20,000 accounts. Is there a way that I can get some air cover over all of them? Or is there a way that I can create content which resonates with them if I'm more of a organic marketer? And then on the other side, I then start taking those accounts and I'm looking for signals, any buying signal I can find. Are they hiring a position which I know I can sell to? Is there a key event change? Are they raising funds? Are they going for an M&A? Anything which is a good signal that makes me go, right, this company could be gearing up for me. They're going to be in my warmer category where I'm going to target them a little bit more aggressively. And then I'll have a level below there, which is people that are now engaging with us. They're on the website. We've met them at an event, whatever it is. They're going to be my warmer ones. And I'm going to make sure, there's no way they can come to the internet without seeing me. That's the goal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly the point. And one of the things that so far you've mentioned a lot, And I think that it's critical is the correct role of sales, not only on what you want to know from them and hear from them. So how to use information that they give you in order to build those lists and build that segmentation and give the priority on what you're going to activate and how, but also their role afterwards, right? So once you run that ABM program, once you've run campaign, whatever it is, and whichever channels you've activated, they have a role to get in there, right? Because if we say, all right, we're going to activate these programs, we're going to have this strategy running for 6 months, and then what, right? So a lot of times we see that disconnect where there's no follow-up action afterwards, right? And without that orchestration, I feel that everything falls apart, right? Is rather don't do it if that's going to be the case, because it's going to be a waste of time. It's a very delicate dance between putting together the strategy itself and then following up all the way through until the end.
Yeah, completely agree. And I feel, and this isn't a complaint on sales, it's part of their job. If they don't buy into it, they're not going to put everything into it. So,
Right.
if you don't bring them along on the journey and all of a
Yep.
sudden you just say, hey guys, here's these accounts, you got to go after them, and they've not invested in it themselves, why are they going to care? Ultimately, you're standing between them and their livelihood. This is how they make money. They need to believe in what you're doing. So I think the key is just bringing them in, involving them, understanding their perspective. Ultimately, between sales and the customer success team, they are the heartbeat of the company. They
Yep.
know the customer more than anyone else. So I always involve them and try and get that buy-in. The more that they feel like those accounts and the messaging you're going out with and the people you're targeting and the flows that you've built work for them, the more they're willing to do the follow-up and keep nurturing. And again, as I say, in my experience, when things have fallen off, it's normally because they've just lost faith. And with sales, you often get quite entrepreneurial people who believe, I can do this on my own. Like I'm better off
Yep.
just putting it into my hands. So that's when you building these cadences suddenly falls off because they're going, no, I'm not buying into it anymore. So yeah, I just find definitely overshare, involve as much as you can, get the
Mm-hmm.
team to buy into it. But then you have got to push them on it. And, we've built this, we believe there's a plan here. This is how it's going to work. The other one that just popped into my head, when I was at Ring Central, way back when we launched ABM for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
actually we did it for one rep and one BDR. So probably not the way
Wow.
to do it. Puts a lot of risk in that one rep performing. But
Uh-huh.
we tried launching it with like 3 or 4 reps and nobody was really buying into it. And we had
Mm-hmm.
one rep who was showing a lot of interest. So we actually picked him like 10 accounts and we went solely after those accounts. He was the first one to close $1 million deal. So the results were
Well,
definitely
there you go.
there. And I can tell you for a fact, as soon as that happened, it was, we want some of this. How do we get involved in
Of
this?
course, of course, of course. I believe that a lot of the times is also, you touched this partially already with your last comment, but that lack of communication and understanding. So
Yeah.
marketing correctly communicates what is going on, and this is not just like pure lead gen or something that you're nurturing your prospects, right? You're influencing your buying groups within those companies. It has nothing to do with it. Is way, way, way more complex. And again,
Yeah.
like we said, they are part of that success of that program, right? Of that activation, because otherwise it makes a sense. So it is, to me at least, one of the main things that I sense after working with so many clients and agencies in this sector, that that communication between both departments is generally the biggest problem. Not so much the execution, etc. It's one of the biggest problems, that both don't talk correctly between them and they
Mm.
don't understand each other. And that is one of the big drivers. And that's why I believe it's so important that we're able to, from our side, also cooperate with them and help them understand. And a lot of times ourselves, we do say, let's get them in the call. So while we're having
Yeah.
the discussion, they understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the end goal is, right? Like we're not just like handing like a lead in here, here you go, that's it. Like there's been a process in there that they can enrich so much of their actions based on that. There's so many actionable
Yes. Yeah.
insights that you're able to take from these.
Yeah. Completely agree. I feel like, sales often expect from marketing everything to be warm. But if you
Hmm.
go through this process, and again, you've taken the time, you've involved sales, you've segmented your list, you've explained how you've done that. Now, actually, you pull the numbers up. Hey, we've got this
Yep.
many accounts. This is our ACV. That means this is the market. So people we bring through, they might not be ready for you today, but actually,
Hmm.
if you can nurture them, connect on LinkedIn, pop back in every 6 months, whatever it is, we have a huge amount of faith that they're going to come around eventually. And I've done, with AI now, you can kind of start looking into buying cycles, for different
Hmm.
technologies. And like even the most complex technologies like CRMs, they seem to be entering into a 5 year cycle anyway, where every five
Yep.
years people are going, all right, actually, let's evaluate. We might stay where we are, but let's evaluate a new CRM. So for most companies, from what I've seen, for most technology, within a 5 years, that everybody in your market is going to go up and at least start looking at a new piece of technology and
Yep.
evaluating whether what they've got's good or they need to move on. So, all right, 5 years is a long time, but it's also not a long time if you're targeting these people and you're really focused on them.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Honestly, I couldn't agree more. Um, Coming from there, and kind of, I'm going back to the beginning a bit. One of the things that you've said is that most B2B companies lock their ICP in that workshop that I mentioned at the beginning and never touch it again. So I know why that's dangerous, but could we explain a little bit why that's a problem specifically for ABM and where the whole program is built on that target list, right? So
Mm.
why shouldn't that happen and why do we need to change that?
Yeah, I think unfortunately most ICPs I've come across, it is exactly that. It's been created through normally a silo group of people, and they've pushed it onto the company and said, hey, this is who we're now claiming as our
Yep.
ICP. And then it gets forgotten about, or it gets not forgotten about. It's just like it's a routine project. Okay, yeah, this is our ICP for 2 years. In 2 years' time, we're going to go and revisit it. I think your ICP needs to be dynamic,
Hmm.
especially in today's age. Like the disruption of AI is huge. So somebody you could have sold to yesterday, maybe you can't sell to them today. Maybe their needs have changed. So for me, what you really want to be looking at is how can you continuously monitor that ICP, understand whether or not their behaviors have changed and their needs have changed, and really I wouldn't say building that cadence of looking into it, but I'd actually just have like making sure you got your alerts set up, you understand what's happening in the
Hmm.
market. Good product marketing will obviously help with that, but also forward looking. Like product is always changing. Is there a new
Yeah, of
market that
course.
we can go after now? Is this a better fitting market? And what you need to avoid is not flip flopping the company, pivoting from one side to the other side.
Of
But
course.
if you focus on this ICP and then you go, hey, this is it, it's locked away, you're never going to evolve your marketing. And
Right.
unfortunately, it would be nice if we didn't have to, but unfortunately, the market is changing daily for us at the moment. And I think that's where there's a big difference. The companies that are keeping up, they're the ones that are going to be successful. The ones that are adapting fast and
Hmm.
paying attention. And when they launch something new, they're aware that that might open up a new better market for them to go after. They're the ones that I think are gonna see the success.
Right. And I know that this will change from company to company, right? It's not going to be the same, but on average, and again, keeping in mind there's not the same, let's say, cybersecurity to manufacturing, but how often should that account list be updated, right? So how often should we actually check that out, not only because priorities have changed or because the market has changed, and what signals tell us to do that, right? That
Hmm.
we need to change, or that perhaps one of the accounts or some of the accounts have drifted off what actually our priorities are.
Yeah. When I'm doing it, I would take again. I would take my segment. Let's say it's 20,000 companies, and to the best of my ability, I want to visualize this. I'm a very visual person,
Yep. Yeah.
so I would take my 20,000 companies. I'm going to visually lay this out to see how many are in our CRM. How many are already talking to us? How many do we think are visiting our website, are aware of us? And then how many are cold? Now, I want to track that people are moving through that funnel, becoming customers. I'll
Yeah.
also track the churn as well. So
Yeah.
you asked about the signals. You've got two ends there. On one end, if all these customers start churning, then you've got yourself a problem. What you're selling isn't working for
Yep.
them. You need to revisit this list. On the other side of the funnel, if your close rates are really low and you're kind of having to convince them to buy,
Yep.
you've not got the right market either. And again, then that's when I would go and revisit it. What I'd be looking at doing is once you reach a level of penetration of that list, and I normally say like 20-25% of that list is now in either like they know you, they're talking to you, or they're customers, you probably want to start looking at either expanding it or looking at another segment. And to be honest with you, that number is just something which I've noticed in companies I've worked in. When you reach that kind of level, it starts to slow down, and you still want to be there. Obviously, your sales targets have gone up as well. You're growing throughout the year. So I would start looking at adding more on at that point.
Right.
But as I say, the key points for me are those two: if they're churning and if you're not closing them. And this is the really nice thing with STP
Yeah.
is you can look at all your different segments and compare the conversion rates for all of them and start saying, oh, hold on, like these guys here, we have a 30% win rate, whereas these guys here, it's only 15. Why are we, what's going on? Like, let's revisit this.
Yeah. And that is a very interesting thing because we do also ask about this when we get saying no. But listen, in our case, of course, programmatic, when we run it together with the strategies directly from the client or the agency, whichever it is. But we don't often get an update at all in terms of lists. It happens not so much because of the signals that you mentioned, because when they're responding, we're not, closing the sort of segment. It's more because their internal priorities have changed rather than getting a signal. But usually lists do stay quite static. I would say that we do recommend changing them if nothing happens, like do a revision after 3 months of running the program, because otherwise what we cannot do is run something for 1 year without actually seeing what's going on with that account, right, with the decision makers within there. But it is something that I believe that the market needs to implement more, that revision and refresh of the priorities that you have, right?
Yeah.
Another thing that we see is that people don't often share lists, account lists, with any sort of priority or tiers. Is one of the things that we touched like at the beginning. One of the first questions that we asked is about how do we prioritize those lists, right? So for teams that only have the resources to run one or two ABM tiers, right? So one or two of these, how would you prioritize this one? So which ones do we want to have some sort of a one-to-one strategy, and which ones do we want to say these ones are fine, but they're not a priority? We still want to impact them, but they're not a priority. How would you go about it?
Yeah, I'm stealing this from Andre and Vlad, who are the godfathers of ABM. But I think it's bang on the money. What they say. And personally, I think if you're first launching, or not personally, Andre and Vlad think, and I agree with them, if you're launching an ABM campaign, you want to make it successful. So pick the warm accounts. Pick the ones who already know you and you haven't converted, the ones which have already shown some interest and haven't converted, just to prove it out, to prove that, hey, look, we can serve ads to these people and bring them back in. And we can, move someone through the funnel and get them to a closed deal. Because often, and I think it's part marketing's fault, is we set the bar too high and we go, oh, this is a completely cold list. We're testing this completely cold list. We're going to go after them and expect results in 3 months. And, as I said earlier, like a sales cycle, buying cycle often, or people change technology maybe every 5 years, chances of you hitting the right people is quite slim if you're not using signals. So I would, first case, I would try and target the warm ones and just really test bringing them back through. And again, not aiming it specifically for you guys, but obviously there's a million things which is down to your customers. Like they need to test their ad creatives, their messaging,
Of course.
is it resonating and all of that. So for me, getting that first piece right on a warmer audience is going to help you then expand it out. And then at the point that I'm then going, yes, we've seen some good signals, we've brought people through, they're engaging, the click-through rates are at a good level, all of that stuff. Then I'd start looking at targeting more of the cold list. And again, that's going to be within the segment I've created, who's showing me the good levels of intent, who's hiring or raising or whatever
Right.
it is that you can find. And actually, I mean, those signals now are becoming even more, readily available.
Right.
There's so
Yep.
much more available to us with AI that I think there's kind of no excuse now not to be using some signals in your marketing and building that in. And obviously, if you focus on that and you start seeing success, then I would go to the next level, which is the more colder. I want to engage them. I want to just warm them up. But my metrics there have completely changed. At this point,
Absolutely.
all I want is them to land on the website. Come to my website once so I know that I exist, and then I'll worry about trying to bring you back in later. But at this point, I'm just, I'm at the cold list. I just want you to know that I exist, and then I'll be happy.
Of course, because we know that 85% of the decision when there's a buying group that wants to go after a new provider, new tech, most of the time, 85% of the time, that decision is already pre-made indoors,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
the only way that you're going to be able to influence that is either through advertising or other strategies that you will be able to impact those buying groups. And in the end, having that familiarity that, oh, yeah, actually, I know who these guys are. And from programmatic perspective, one of the things that we see is that if the client allows us to have tracking on their website, a lot of times you see that people don't necessarily click on the ad, regardless if it's mobile and desktop, if it's display, if it's video or connectivity. They don't necessarily have to click on the ad, but we see that actually the proportion of people visiting the website without clicking the ad compared to people click on the ad and visiting
Yeah.
is 300% higher, right? So people
Yes.
say, oh, this is interesting. Let me check the website. They don't click, but it stays in their mind and they go. And one of the things that you touched on, which is super, super, super important, is exactly that. How crucial that creative is, right? Because in the end is the message. And one thing I always say, like when having meetings, when I have sales calls, when I'm having podcasts, is messaging in B2B, it's difficult because generally a B2B solution will not be a simple one, right? So tell me, how do you
in this little ad.
put that into a standard display ad without it being, like either a ton of text, which nobody's going to read, or being too generic and simplistic, right? And that is where, rich media enters in, animated banners enters in,
Yeah.
video enters in, because with rich media, you're able to interact with the ad, right? If you want to build some a survey, you want to build a gamify ad, something that you can actually, engage with, and you're able to measure that per account that you're targeting as well, right? So all of these things are so important, and barely anyone is doing them, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's paying attention to that, and to me, it's when we got started with B2B, one of the first things that shocked me that went like, well, wait a minute. No, you cannot serve this. Like, we need to actually revisit this, revise it, and either we build something new from scratch, or we need to select what we're going to serve, because
Yeah.
otherwise this is going to have no effect, right? Especially I would say for these cold accounts that you want to start influencing or reaching out, maybe for those one-to-ones or warmer leads that you mentioned, that's different because they're already aware of you and maybe just seeing your brand, that will be enough. Personally, I think that that's still bad, but it's something that perhaps would work. But for new accounts, we always say, listen, guys, we need to either do video,
Mm.
rich media, audio ads as well, because in the end, you're listening, right? You listen in the name of the brand. Connected TV is something that we're doing a lot right now, being able to see the ad, a quality ad, not some just whatever, a proper quality ad being shown to be, seeing the name, hearing the name, like hearing the explanation, that has so much value. And you're going to pay for that placement the same amount of money, regardless if the video that you put together is good or bad. So why not just do it good, right?
Yeah.
And it is so simple and so logical, but these things make such a gigantic difference, right? And having forget about talking about the tiers within the accounts, which I believe is crucial, like saying which ones are your tier one, right? So tier one, we can go with that one-to-one strategy for each one of them. Then we have tier two, which is we can say one to few and then one to many at the end, right? And it's not that you don't want to target some accounts and some you don't. You want to make sure that the priority and the strategy that you deploy for each one of them is different because they're at a different stage, right? And therefore,
Yeah.
the ad creatives, the messaging, the sequencing that you want to activate in there is different. So I think it all ties up very nicely in the end within the conversation that we're having coming from that STP framework that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, I think 100%. And again, we didn't touch too much on it. I said, for me, the positioning in STP is more about messaging, and I think that's the thing, exactly as you just mentioned. Like, if you've segmented your database and you've picked your target, now you're onto that messaging piece. And that's where, unfortunately, I feel very much as you were just saying, a lot of media teams or demand gen teams, whatever you want to call them, lack the content creative resource. And it's quite intensive to do it properly. You do need the resource. And for me, as you say, I've now segmented, I've now picked my target. Now I want very clear messaging to that target only. It needs to resonate with them. And if it's broad or it could be to anyone, it's not going to be clicked on, or even it's not going to be absorbed, to your point. So I feel like when going into a project like this, you need to be upfront with the creative team. Hey, we're going to need some help. We want a good amount of adverts that we're going to test. We're going to give you feedback. We're going to let you know what we think is working. And we're going to keep testing this until we land on something which we believe is working. And again, for me, one of the quickest ways to get feedback on stuff is through paid marketing. Like, you could reach the people you want to reach instantly and see what's resonating. And within a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you've kind of got some results of, hey, this message here did nothing. This message here did a bit. And it's a missed opportunity, actually, that people aren't really doing that.
Yeah. And what you said in there is so true about companies saying we don't have the resources. And we've worked with huge companies. So I'm not saying this in a negative way, but companies that make billions in revenue a year, and they're more than happy to spend $200,000 per month in paid advertising for an ABM program. But when you tell them, okay, can we work on the creatives? We have no resources. We cannot. Yeah. It's not that they don't have the resources. They don't have the structure in place in order to execute that. And they would need to build that, right? So that is the translation. That's one of the reasons why we started putting together creatives ourselves, because otherwise, again, if you start with bad ingredients, the target account list, bad creatives, a bad strategy, there's nothing you will expect from that, right? You either do it well or you don't do it at all, right? So that still comes into that whole orchestration piece. Now, staying here in terms of the advertising itself, one of the things that you've talked about is that we have to layer mass marketing on top of the targeted segments rather than just choosing one or the other, right? So one doesn't cancel the other option. So how does that look like operationally for like an ABM demand gen team running both motions at once?
Yeah, again, it's all around signals, right? Like, we're pretty much just talking about signal based. I mean, programmatic signal based marketing. That's a cool name for us.
Like it.
But I think, first of all, the reason why I say the mass thing is I think we often forget that people are still people. And if, as you said earlier, 85% of the decisions is happening before, they've even entered the buying cycle. So if I can get in front of the right people and grow my brand awareness, then it's only going to help me later on in life. At the same time, we kind of forget that people speak to people, and
Yeah, of course.
I guarantee you there's a Slack channel with like 20 CIOs all chatting about technology, and one of them who wasn't in your target list is going, hey, why don't you try this? Because they've seen it, right? And we forget that. And actually, that's one of the most powerful things that can happen is an introduction from a peer. It really helps you. So I think having that broad approach, it only benefits you. Yes, it costs you money, but in the long run, it benefits you. But as you get through the funnel, I'm really going to focus on those signals. And as I say, you've kind of got what I would call your cold list. They're the people which never been on your website, never clicked an advert. You've got no visibility of them whatsoever. And I want to be serving them adverts just to try and introduce me. Maybe I'm showing a little bit of what my product can do. Maybe I'm trying to add value with some quality content or, a podcast, whatever it is. But I just want to introduce myself to them. But as they start coming through, they visited the website. I can see they're on the website. Okay, now, hey, let's change the adverts up a little bit. Let's focus on the retargeting, bringing them back in. How can we get them to do the next thing? Then they've engaged with a pricing page, or they've engaged with some like FAQs. They're more into the product. They're trying to understand it. The engagement's up to maybe like 5 to 10 people in the team. Now I'm going to hit them hard. Way more salesy, hey, your competitor did this with us, or this is what you could achieve. And like, I don't mind being the sales guy then, because at that point they clearly are in that kind of debating stage. So like how it would look is your typical funnel. As much as you can debate whether funnels exist, clearly someone's moving through stages until you get to that bottom point. And at each of those stages, ideally you've got creative switch, once again, align with your STP and align with the stage and are telling something different. And your expectations are going to be different from each advert. I said it before, but expecting to put one advert out and hit a home run doesn't really happen, which is why I always talk about Moneyball marketing. But it is like, you've got to move people from one base to the next base, the next base, the next base. It's a combination of multiple adverts and messages run across multiple stages of the funnel, which ultimately ends up in the closed business.
Right. And that one is one that specifically for me hits quite close to home, because it is true that, of course, again, going back to the beginning, and I was literally having a conversation yesterday about this, but we want to target only this group of people, right? Like these decision makers within the companies, and that's completely fine. That's not a problem. However, there's a couple things in here. One is what you mentioned, that why not deliver to the whole company as well? Again, you have to be strategic. If you're targeting Microsoft, you don't want to target the whole company, right? Maybe you want to just after the HQ, and that's still fine. But if you want to target just very specific people, you can do that, but it's going to be less supply. Therefore, the CPM is going to be higher, and you will not even deliver that much volume, right? It's like if you're delivering, I don't know, let's say $300 CPM, you go like, this is crazy. That's absurd. It's an absurd amount, of course. That makes no sense. That's crazy. Yeah, but if you only deliver 100 impressions, you're effectively having $30 of spend. Right? It's not that crazy, but the value of those impressions are absolutely massive, right? At the same time, if you say, I'm going to target together with that mass marketing to the account, but with a $5 CPM, again, yes, you're going to deliver to everyone, but it's going to be very cost effective. So in the end, is all the levers and options that you have that you can play with in order to build that. And I think that focusing on one or the other, we never do that. We always run both of them side by side. And I think it's logical, because I think it's a missed opportunity otherwise. And like you said, it's something that doesn't cancel each other at all. Like, I don't see the logic why that would be, right? Why you have to choose one or the other as well. So I think that is a very cheap way, if we're talking about the CPM, is a very cheap way to influence and touch everyone at the company. And let's say that the decision makers that you're talking about are aware of your company, they mention it, and more people in the company outside of your buying group say, "Ah, yeah, actually, I've heard about those. Yeah, I know who they are. Yeah, yeah." So that also creates that reaffirmation, right? And I think that
Yeah.
it's important. However, and I know that we did say this already, when you're running multiple channels, multiple strategies touching the people that you want to target at the same time from different points, how does the attribution work in this multi-touch tactic, right?
Mm.
So we don't want to measure these separately. We can, but it doesn't make sense. So from your point of view and your experience, when you're doing that, how do you actually measure and do the attribution here?
Yeah. So again, I've said this publicly, and I always say it in a way which I think makes me sound like I don't like data. But I feel like attribution gets in the way of a lot of
Yep.
marketing.
Yep.
Um, and it's not that I don't like data. I was literally on a call the other day and said spreadsheets are still my favorite tool, which says a lot. Um,
Yeah.
but I think what can happen is you try and pinpoint the exact channel, the exact campaign which did the thing. And yet, logically, we all know it's multiple actions, it's multiple campaigns, it's going to be some offline,
Of
online stuff.
course.
There's so many things going on, especially when you move into enterprise. You know, there's so many reports now out there showing how many touches a company has. So again, I like to look at this as much as I can, at least when I'm reporting upwards or I'm working with sales. I like to look at this at the targets again and really going back into that visualization I spoke about previously. Are we moving people from the cold into the warmer, into the even warmer, you know, talking to us, customers, etc. And if I can start showing that, hey, this list here was 20,000, and of those 20,000, 5% of them now know us and are engaging with us, and X% of them are now customers, you know, and that's changed over each month or each quarter, however long we're looking at, then I can start proving the case that together, all the marketing we're doing is impacting it.
Mm-hmm.
Then at a more, you know, that's kind of like how I would manage up to the CFO or someone like that when I'm trying to prove marketing in general is doing its piece. Going down and like how I'd work with the team and how I would understand actually is what you're doing working is
Mm-hmm.
again, I would very much look at those signals of, like you were saying, we've got this very super targeted list here, which is a higher CPM, could scare everyone. But actually, what's the rate of those people that are returning to the website? Or what's the rate of those people that are now talking to sales and getting on discovery calls? And to me, I think you have to have an element of manual
Mm-hmm.
evaluation and, you know, kind of
100%.
look into the data and take the time. Um, AI, Claude, whatever, can do quite a lot now, but I still think you need to look at it yourself and understand it. And then on the more broader side, again, I would be looking at things like which advert's getting a good click through. You know, is that resonating? Which message is resonating? Which campaigns do we believe are efficient because we can see they're bringing people back to the website or back to the stages? So I really look at it from the two levels. And what I would say is going into the meeting with the team, I would be saying straight away, like, look, we're like trying to create that environment where people can present bad numbers. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if they believe, like you just said, hey, shit, I've over here advertising to this guy and it's a $300 CPM, like that's something scary to present because you feel like you've just messed up and you've made a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But then if you can get into it and you start looking at it, then you start, you know, using your own logic to understand, well, are we reaching the right people? Are we bringing them through? I've yet to find an attribution tool that can really solve this. I think you have to have some human intervention.
My point, and this is again super interesting, not just for B2B, for B2C as well. My point here is I think you cannot really. There will always be a disconnect. And I'm coming back from what you said about data. When you say, I hate data, we don't really hate data, but we know that following that deterministic trail will always lead to a dead end when there's a
Yeah,
disconnect between the jumps that you need to do. And it's not that you cannot do the attribution, it's that just that the data that you have is not going to give you that, right? And it's like saying that there's this, this prospect that you've been nurturing. Let's imagine that I've had this relationship with someone at a company. We chatted, like they're aware of us, whatever. We have went for dinners, or whatever it is, and they know what we do. They don't work with us, and then after a couple years of that, one of our like sales managers goes to them, and boom, they close them. Said, yeah, it's him. It's him.
Yeah.
He did the whole thing. So, no, there's been a period of nurturing, right? And this is just like one touch point. There's so many other things that you are able to do that. And the only way that you will be able to actually do that multi-touch attribution correctly is if you were in the person's mind, which is never going to
Yes.
happen.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
know what is influencing. You don't know what's happening there. You have no idea. I think that you can narrow it down with what you have, especially when you have tracking, view through attribution, etc. You can get that idea on how you're influencing that ICP or that the buying group that you have in there, for sure. Again, I believe that if you have targeting an account and they don't click on the app, but they visit the website repeatedly afterwards, that's a great
Good
signal
signal.
for the
Yeah.
sales team to know, say, hey guys, we've impacted them. This has resonated with them. I think that we're in a good place, right? And especially
Yeah.
if it's cold accounts that they're not aware of you. So I think that that's a very important thing. But again, that attribution point a lot of times kills everything because they want to justify it mathematically. They want to say,
Yes.
how is
Yeah.
this benefiting us? And I'm not even mentioning the example of people coming to us say, hey, we want to do lead gen. So, well, it's not going to work. I'm sorry. You're not going to have people clicking on the ad and filling a form. You might, but it's not the point.
But the
And
odds are low. Yeah.
I'm going to use this example that I use many, many times. Can you use an F1 car to do a rally? I mean, perhaps maybe it's gonna, 100 yards, maybe, but it could even finish. I have no idea. Is it the right tool? No, it's not. Clearly
Yeah.
not. So
Yeah. Good
don't
analogy.
try using tools for something they're not meant to be, because then you will never get the results that you want to get, right? I think that we are so far away from this sort of like lead gen agencies things. Like, it doesn't
Yes.
work like that anymore. Like, this is from 10, 15 years ago. It's not the same now. And I think that that is one of the main things that people need to understand in terms of where the attribution ends, like when
Mm.
that's as much as you can do, and how you can use that data, those insights, in order to take more action, and to understand what the tool is meant to do, right? To
Yeah.
understand how do you implement and how do you marry the different channels between them, right? Like, so you have programmatic on one side, you got LinkedIn, you got, I don't know, like if you want to do mass marketing, not ABM, but mass marketing with Google, Meta, things like that, right? Depending on what your product is. But I think that that together with the understanding of the proper usage of the tools is one of the most crucial and important things nowadays when running an
Yeah.
ABM
I agree.
program. And we've seen so many, big agencies coming and uploading a list of 20,000 accounts with a $1,000 budget per month, which essentially is delivering 5 cents per account at best.
Yeah.
You're not going to do a lot with that. Newsflash, you're not going to do a lot with that. Right. So that is also an important piece to keep in mind, and why I believe that there's so much work that needs to be done still.
Yeah. Yeah. A few things on that. I think one thing, like the best, well, first of all, I think people often look in a too small of a window. So actually, with attribution, or let's call it personal attribution, I think if you look further back and you're really, really good at marking, like at this point we did this, at this point we did that. And then when you look back and you can start spotting trends in your data. But it takes a zoomed out view actually to do that. Even with a quick, I've worked in a company before where we were getting 10,000 free signups of our product every single month. It's
Wow.
it's a high volume, but even with that high volume, and it was like a 7-day sales cycle. even with that high volume, a change we made, in February might not show up until May. So we had to zoom out. And then if you're talking enterprise or mid-market where you've got lower volume, 6 months, it might mean, hey, we made a change last year and now we can start seeing that actually that was a bad change. So I do think people, not that they're lazy or anything, but like just kind of expect the attribution to tell them what to do. And you have to go back and look at the data and compare things and keep a really good log of what you changed. The other thing, in an absolute dream world, when you've got loads of money in a huge account, what I'd like to do is to turn off regions, and test, hey, this region here, again, I always use the US as an example because it's so big. But if you can go, East Coast gets XYZ, West Coast gets this, you start to understand, hey, actually, yeah, those display adverts we're running on the East Coast are driving more attention. And I've had this with Facebook. We ran Facebook. We couldn't prove any attribution to it whatsoever. So we did exactly that. We went, East Coast has Facebook, West Coast doesn't. Split the US in half, which I know is very offensive because there's more than just the East Coast and West Coast, but that's what we did. And we saw, hey, when Facebook was running, we had way more SEO leads, way more direct leads, way more PPC leads. Like, there's something in that, and it's enough for me to feel confident enough to carry on with that and deploy that strategy elsewhere.
Yeah. I mean, that last example you used, you have no idea how many times I've heard that, where people say, this channel is not working. We'll stop it. And then they suddenly see that things stop falling apart, right? That there's no leads coming down, whatever. So we don't know why that is working. We have to reactivate it. We have no idea why. We're not able to connect the dots. So, well, because there are limitations to this. And if all you're going to base yourself is off those deterministic signals in order to decide if that works or not, if you want to connect all of the dots, you're not going to be able to do it because there's going to be a break. And that's part of what you need to understand, right? So keeping all of that in mind and all that we touched on, I think quite a lot during our conversation today, if you were auditing an ABM program today, what's the first sign you'd look for that tells you that the target account list has gone stale and needs a change?
Yeah. It would be two things. I mean, first of all, if I walked in and I was given an ABM campaign, I would straight away talk to sales with the list. Let's do a spot check. Can you sell to these people? That's just to make sure that the targeting was at least aligned with sales in the first place. The sale aspect, I would really be looking at, again, the engagement. If none of these people are looking at you, then something's gone very wrong here. And maybe it was your messaging, maybe it was how you targeted them, or maybe you've got the wrong list. So the two things together, if sales really feel like it's the right list, but everything's gone stagnant, no one's coming through, then I would be investigating how are we actually reaching these people and what's the message we're putting out there. Again, I talk a lot from experience because I've made these mistakes. I've fortunately made these mistakes earlier on in life, so I've learned from them. But I've done this, and with programmatic advertising, I've kept creatives going for 6, 9, 12 months and gone, why is no one clicking through anymore?
I wonder why.
And then gone, oh yeah, I forgot to update those creatives. I've done this over here and I haven't done this here. So I think, starting there, like really looking at trying to understand, is it the right list? Do sales align? But then if it's really not moving, no one's engaging, like, when was the last time we tried new creatives? When was the last time we tried a different channel or a different way of approaching them? Or, to your point, have we tried video over static or whatever it is? And looking then to see if we can start bringing them back in. At the point that, you've kind of done that and you've kind of, sales have agreed, but you've gone through and you started updating your creatives and still there's no movement, I would go back to the drawing board and really evaluate that list. And are we using any signals in creating it? Are all those signals like now completely irrelevant to us because whatever's changed in the market, it no longer matters. You don't need this position, whatever it is. Like, has that change happened? And should we now just completely revisit the targeting?
Awesome. I think that I completely agree with that. And again, from all that we've touched today, one of, let's say, the big things, the takeaways that I get in here is that, first of all, the static creatives, static lists, that doesn't work anymore. That's something that companies, agencies cannot afford. Um, that ABM list needs to be dynamic, needs to be alive. So it has to be something that can change and can adapt based on the signals that we explained. And that there's no one single fit for each one of those accounts. We will have to approach them in a different way, right? If you're not segmenting, if you're not prioritizing those tiers, if you're not layering the motions and the sequences, and you don't have that difference of approach between like the smaller clients and the enterprise clients, everything is going to fall apart.
Yeah.
I think that we're going to end it in here. There's a ton of information that we need to absorb. And Sam, thank you so very much for being with us today. I really appreciate it. Guys, if you want to follow Sam, you can do so on LinkedIn and social media. And also, please check out Sam ASTRAD as well on LinkedIn and social media. As always, make sure to follow us, to subscribe. And if you want to learn more about ASTRAD or Sam, you can do so by reaching out to us. Thank you very much, Sam, for being with us.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. Really good chat.
Excellent. We'll see you on the next one.